Coming at you from Bellingham, Washington. This is Two Nuts in the Sack. I'm Julie,
I'm Gavin.
and today we're going to talk about the Donner Party.
Donner, party of four. No, I'm sorry, there's just two of us now. Probably the most infamous group of settlers in the history of the westward expansion. A story of bad decisions, bad luck, tragedy, and cannibalism.
Ew.
On this day in history, February 19th, 1847, the first rescue party reached the doomed settlers and began the process to bring the party home from their unfortunate winter home in the Sierra Nevada mountains next to Truckee Lake, which is now known as Donner Lake.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, like, when shit like that happens, you really have to acknowledge it. So the Donner Party consisted of 87 people, most of them families, and a random group of drivers, teamsters, and handyman. Um, their ages span from 1 year old to almost 70.
Wow.
Yeah, they took babies on this journey.
Dang.
And boy, was that a bad idea.
Oh, man.
They were mostly well-to-do for the time, and all had a vision of a better life in the West. But like many who made the journey along the Oregon Trail in search of a better life, they were poorly suited with the experience necessary to make the near 1,000-mile journey. A journey that was time-sensitive because of weather. Average, it took about 4 to 6 months to get to California from Independence, Missouri, where the Oregon Trail begins. The trail leads up to mountainous terrain that comprise the last 200-ish miles. It was much easier to start than it was to finish, and many people did not finish that, especially many of the people in the Donner Party. It was May 12th, 1846. Group of 9 wagons containing 32 members of the Reed and Donner families and their employees headed west from Independence, Missouri, along the famed and well-traveled Oregon Trail. George Donner was 60, was traveling with his wife Tamsin, 44, and 5 young girls, aged 3 to 14, respectively. George's younger brother Jacob, 56, also joined the party, along with his wife Elizabeth, 45, his 2 teenage stepsons, ages 12 and 14, 5 children, 4 boys and 1 girl, ages 1 through 9.
Those poor kids.
They were accompanied by 5 teamsters to help them drive their wagons. James Reed was an Irish immigrant, was accompanied by his wife Margaret, a stepdaughter Virginia, who was age 13, daughter Patty, age 8, 2 sons, 5 and 3 years old, and Margaret's 70-year-old mother, who was dying of tuberculosis. Luckily for her, she died about 3 weeks into the journey, and they buried her alongside the trail.
Oh, they buried her. They didn't eat her, huh?
No, she got off easy.
Hmm.
The Reeds had hired 3 men to drive their ox teams and a handyman named Bayless Williams and his sister, both 24 and 25, respectively. A week later, the group joined up with a group of 50 wagons led by William H. Russell. By June 16th, they had made it 450 miles, bound for Fort Laramie, Wyoming. Several other families joined the wagon train. The Murphys, Lavinia, I want to say Lavinia. I had a friend in high school named Lavinia. but her name is Lavinah. So it's Lavinah.
Huh, interesting name.
Yes, old timey. Was 37. She was a widow, head, and was the head of a family of 13. 5 young children, 2 wedded daughters, and their families. They were also joined by William Edie, or Eddie, depending on your preference. 28. He was a carriage maker, and brought along his wife Eleanor, 25, and their 2 children. Patrick Breen, 51, was an Iowa farmer. He brought his wife Peggy and 7 children, ranging in age from just 11 months to 14 years old.
Wow.
They also brought their neighbor, a 40-year-old Patrick Dolan. Next was a German immigrant, Louis Kesselberg, who was 32, and his wife Elizabeth, who was 22, and their 2-year-old daughter. Elizabeth was pregnant with Louis Jr. to be born en route. 2 young single men named Spitzer and Reinhard traveled with another German couple, the Wolfingers, a wealthy couple, and they had a daughter as well. But they had hired a driver named Dutch Charlie, and his last name was Burger, so he was Dutch Charlie Burger. And last was Luke Halloran, who was also afflicted with consumption, like the old lady who died earlier.
Wow.
He didn't last long either. As the expanded party approached Fort Laramie, they received a letter from Lansford Hastings. The letter promised a shorter route and safer passage with less opposition from either Mexican government, whom still had control over California, and resident Native American tribes in the area.
Don't do it!
All promising to a group of naive travelers whom had been on the trail for nearly 2 months already. And unfortunately, Hastings was full of shit. He hadn't ever himself tried to make the passage. He had done it, but not with 40 wagon trains of greenhorns behind him.
Oh my God.
So he was like, yeah, it's possible. It'll be great. But he'd never actually done it with a full wagon train. So as much as he wanted to make this the new Oregon Trail, it was very underdeveloped as an idea. But he thought he could make a lot of money doing it. So basically, a bunch of tenderfoots would not be able to make this trail without a lot of hardship and more than likely a lot of death.
Oh.
Because this was not like they had hospitals or anything like that.
Right.
It's like Jimmy breaks his leg and he's dead. It's like, I mean, just think of the Oregon Trail video game.
The what?
The Oregon Trail video game.
Oh my gosh, wouldn't it be funny if you could, like, eat somebody in that game?
Yeah, it's like, pass is snowed in. Do you eat Jimmy, Sally, or Brian? So the Donner Party followed the promise of a shorter, easier path and headed to Fort Bridger, Wyoming to meet up with Hastings. As promised in his letter, he said he would personally guide a journey through the untried Hastings Cutoff.
Bad idea.
Yeah.
Bad idea. Don't do it. Don't do it.
Well, of course, when they arrived in Black Forks, when they arrived at Fort Bridger, Hastings had already left, and they only missed him by like a week. But he'd already left with another group of 40 wagons, the Harlan Young group, which did reach California, but experienced many difficulties along the way. So maybe he wasn't totally full of shit, but it was still a bad idea without a guide because there wasn't like a paved road that they could go along. I mean, they're going through open country and
Right.
they're in wagons with like wooden wheels and shit like that. So a journalist named Edwin Bryant, who was about a week ahead of the Donner Party, realized that this is a bad idea. And if you don't know exactly what you're doing, this could be really bad. So he sent a bunch of letters to to Black Fork, which which was like basically the last main town and trading post before you got too far into the Hastings cutoff. So he tried to dissuade the future wagon trains from risking the journey. Um, Unfortunately, the Donner Party never received this warning, possibly because the store owner in Black Forks, Jim Bridger, whose store sat at the trailhead at the Hastings cutoff, and if the cutoff worked, then he would stand to make a mint off the settlers in search of a shorter trip to California. He explained to the Donner Party that Hastings was correct. The shortcut would provide a smooth ride, easygoing, no chance of meeting any hostile natives.
Now, I was wondering, didn't they get off to a late start for traveling
Well,
with the
they, I mean, they
seasons?
left in May, and so even if it took 6 months, they should have been. I mean, it was definitely a later start than they should have been, because then they would have been like just over the pass in like October, November.
Right.
But as we'll learn, this is not. It was late, but this Hastings cutoff really cocked them up.
And it was one of the worst winters, wasn't it?
It was a very bad winter, and it came earlier than was normal for the area. So, with the promise of the shorter trip, no natives, no Spanish, easygoing, smooth ride, the cutoff would shorten the journey by 350 miles, which is actually false. It actually made the journey longer by about 150 miles.
Oh my God.
The only hiccup would be crossing a 30 to 40 mile stretch of desert, a necessary evil, but well worth the cost. Reed and Donner debated and weighed their options, and Reed eventually won the argument, but without knowledge of the Bryant letters, which said, "Don't do this. This is a bad idea, especially if you don't know what you're doing."
Of course, they
But
don't listen, right? They
of
don't
course,
listen. They don't listen. Nobody listens.
but yeah, without the Bryant letters, he would have no idea of what a horrible idea that this really was. Although he encountered an old friend named James Kleiman who tried in vain to tell Reed that the Hastings cutoff was no good, especially considering that the majority of the party was women and children, and nobody really knew what they were doing except ox go that way. If only they had listened.
Jesus Christ.
On July 31st, 1846, the Donner Party left Black Forks only 11 days behind the Harlan Young group. At this point, they're joined by another family and a 16-year-old boy named Jean-Baptiste Trudeau.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah. And so their party grows bigger still. But ultimately, like back in those days, there was a little bit of safety in numbers, because if you were going to be invaded by an Indian tribe, you wanted to have bigger numbers than they did.
Right.
And so the more people you had, the more the merrier, because you wouldn't have to worry about a small Indian tribe taking over your wagon train and stealing all your shit and raping all your women and killing all your horses and oxen and
Makes
just
sense.
being the savages they were written out to be. But and as a bonus, Hastings was kind enough to leave notes along the trail, literal like paper nailed to a tree,
Ah.
so that they could sort of navigate and follow this little paper trail. Um, but the path, even though it was indicated by these papers, was proving much more difficult for the Donners than promised by either Hastings or Bridger. It was not well worn by thousands of wagons passing over it for years and years and years. It became increasingly more treacherous. All able bodied men had to hop out, cut down trees, move boulders to make way for cattle, wagons, and oxen. As they made their way through the Wasatch Mountains, the Graves family caught up. A party of 13, the Graves were amongst the last pioneers to leave Missouri, proving that the Donners were woefully behind schedule. And now we're 87 members strong.
Wow.
After a few more weeks of travel, the party was beginning to question the wisdom of the decision to take the Hastings cutoff. But at the risk of having to turn around and miss their chance to make their journey that year, they continued on. And the journey led them to the Great Salt Lake Desert. And the 87 began to dwindle. Water growing scarce, livestock strained, they crossed the desert only to find another desert larger than the one that they just passed. And this one is a big salt flat.
Now, I'm wondering, did they end up eating their ox before the humans?
Oh yeah. No, I mean like the humans like that was a last resort. But
But
we'll
who
get there.
pulled their
We'll get there.
wagons?
We'll
No,
get
I
there.
get it. I get it. I'll slow down.
So water was growing scarce. The livestock were strained. They cross the desert. They find a larger desert. As they press on, they encounter an inhospitable environment, hot as blazes during the night, hot as blazes during the day, cold as the dickens during the night. Sorry for that. The salt-covered ground literally swallowed the wagons because the salt would draw moisture up from the ground, and it would become just almost like quicksandy, and the wagons were covered up to about half the way up the wagon wheel. They ended up having to ditch some wagons. They had to oxen and cows were literally dying of dehydration and running away. And so they were suffering. Suffering from heat stroke, suffering from dehydration, cattle and horses gone. It took 6 days to cross the desert when it was purported to only take 2.
Wow.
So they were in rough shape.
Dang.
Cursing Hastings' name, the party did prevail and rejoiced the cutoff trail and rejoined the cutoff trail. All in all, the shortcut had added a month to their journey. At this point, they were supposed to be like more than a month ahead, so they were kind of on schedule, and then like, oh, we'll take the shortcut, and it added more time
Oh
than it should
no.
have to go as far as they did.
Oh no.
At one point in the middle of the desert, they were making about 1.5 miles a day.
Wow.
So just like crawled to snail's pace. It was terrible because they're also in a desert, so lots of heat, no water, bad for any living creature.
Oh, poor kids.
Yeah. So, and all the morale amongst the amongst this crew was starting to dwindle. A man named John Snyder got into an argument with Reed, and he started beating Reed's oxen because they weren't able to move fast enough. And so so Reed goes up, confronts Snyder. Snyder hits Reed and allegedly hits Reed's wife Elizabeth as well.
Holy shit!
And so Reed stabs Snyder, kills him. He
Oh my
got
god!
him like underneath the clavicle, and he died.
Did they eat him?
No, no, they're not there yet. They're not there yet. They're still humans.
Excuse me.
But not having any sort of like actual law system set up, because they're west of the Continental Divide, so there really is no law of the land. They kind of turn to their own selves, and they decide that instead of eye for an eye, they will banish Reed. At this point, everybody's just kind of out for themselves. They still have to travel together. Yes, they know that because safety in numbers things. But the remaining members of the party split into basically familial factions and grudgingly continue on their journey. Hardship continued as Native Americans, the Paiutes, chased away horses, oxen, and cattle. And Reinhardt and Spitzer, who were helping out the Wolfingers, who were supposedly wealthy, the Wolfinger and Spitzer and Reinhardt go off so that they can cache or bury their wagon, so that they can hide some booty. And the only ones to return from that were Reinhardt and Spitzer. So they said, oh yeah, we had a conflict with those Indians, and sorry, Mr. Wolfinger didn't make it back.
Oh jeez. Oh jeez.
So a small amount of hope did come as the group finally did make it across that second desert. They make it to the Truckee River, but with little time to rest before the impending crossing of the Sierra Nevada mountain range. It's October 20th, 1846, and the Donner Party, believing the worst is behind them and that they could see the pass and no snow should fall until at least mid to late November, they set off again. Breen's in the lead, followed by the Reeds, the Graves, the Murphys, with the Donners bringing up the rear.
Okay.
And the Eddies are somewhere in there, but I forget what order they came in. So snow begins to fall as the Breens near the summit. And they had to go up a nearly 1,000-foot vertical slope to get to Truckee Lake, now known as Donner Lake.
Oh, man.
Snow continues to fall as more of the group meets up. They look out over the route that they would have to travel, and they see 5 to 10 foot snow drifts.
Now, why do they call
everywhere.
Why do they call it the Donner Party if there's so many different families?
Well, because it's Donner. Donner was the guy that had the original idea. Reed piggybacked onto Donner, and again, joining forces, they now have more wagons, more people, so they'll be able to make it safe through Injun country.
I wonder whose idea it was.
Please don't hold that against me.
Okay. No, I just wonder whose idea it was to start eating people.
That one's really hard to nail down. But
okay, sorry,
again,
keep going.
We're not quite
going.
there.
I know.
They're just getting into peril. They're not quite to a total oh shit moment yet. But so they start. So basically, they're close because now they see these 5 to 10 foot snowdrifts, and the snow just keeps falling, and so they decide that they're gonna make camp. They're the Breens were able to build onto a cabin that was pre-existing from a previous crossing, like maybe years back. So they have this old basis for a cabin. The the Reeds also build a cabin, and the Graves build a cabin. They're big enough to hold about 20 people apiece because ultimately um, they set up this they set up these cabins. There's 19 men, 12 women, and 21 children.
Wow.
Now the Donners weren't quite lucky enough to make it before the snow falls, so they're about 5 miles down a steep slope, and they have 21 in tow. But they don't have the same resources to be able to build cabins, so they just sort of set up like a little tent city.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And in that Donner camp, there's the widow Wolfinger and her child, their hired driver, 6 men altogether, 6 men, 3 women, and 12 children. So now it's November 4th, and a storm that would last 8 days hung over the Donner Party, and it snowed and
Oh
snowed
no.
and snowed. Bing Crosby probably got his inspiration from it. But so supplies are dwindling. Oxen begin to die. And several unsuccessful hunting expeditions yielding little except for one bear, which Eddie, or the William Eddy guy, he was the only experienced hunter, goes out once, kills a bear, brings it back, and he's like, "Look, we're saved." And then he went out again and again and again and came back with nothing. So one bear, yay, could feed a family, but they've got 81 people at this point.
Right.
They've lost 6 thus far. So the food wouldn't last long. So desperation running rampant. They decide individuals unencumbered, without wagons, women, or children, might be able to make passage and send help back for the rest of the party. So on November 21st, the first expedition leaves, only to return 2 days later, because walking through waist-deep snow is really hard, especially when you haven't eaten a proper meal in weeks. Oh, excuse me. They were out of food. They were now down to boiling oxen hide into a really disgusting jelly-like substance.
Ew.
That's all they had.
That sounds gross.
Yeah, you would probably have died.
Probably. Probably.
They were able to, they used as much as they could. They ate the oxen first. They were down to boiling ox hides, ox bones, and horse bones to make soup. But ultimately they boiled them down to where the bones had no more nutrients in them, and so they were pretty much just eating gross bone water that had nothing except little chips of bone in it, because the bones had been boiled so many times they became brittle.
Delicious.
Yeah, so then they started burning the bones to make them even more brittle, but to where they could eat those bones, just straight bones, to fill their bellies. But there was like little to no nutrient value left. So, and even the Murphy children had picked apart the last of the oxhide rug that they had sitting in front of their fireplace that they would all sit on and try
Oh
and
my
huddle for warmth.
God.
So as January as January rolled around, the party makes one last big push, dubbed the Forlorn Hope. It was 17 men, women, and children set out to cross the mountain pass. The group lost their way, malnourished and snowblind. A blizzard forces the group to halt, and 2 members died as the blizzard progressed. Patrick Dolan lost his shit, ran into the woods naked.
Oh, Jesus.
And when he returned, he died just a few hours later.
How did he die?
Well, he probably died from exposure because he literally stripped down butt ass naked and ran into the woods, just being like, ah, ah, ah.
Okay. Crazy man.
So yeah, like I said, lost his shit, ran into the woods, and when he returned, he was pretty much exhausted, very much frostbitten, and died very soon after. Murphy wasn't doing too well either, and his health was deteriorating, and the group just said, you know what? No more time for decency. We're going to eat Dolan.
Ew.
And so they did. They
Nom nom nom.
stripped out his brains, took out all the organs, dried them. Then they started going after the other bodies. They stripped out all the muscle meat and they dried it over a fire so that they could have human jerky to keep them going.
Gosh.
There was only 3 people that didn't eat any of the meat, and it was like 2 Indian guides and William Eddy, the guy who shot the bear. He was just like, nah, I can't do that. It's just too much. So he would rather starve than eat people until he was really, really, really starving, and he did end up eating a person.
Oh, geez.
So, but on January 12th, the group, now just 7 out of the original 17.
Only 7?
Yeah. So 10 people in that sojourn died, and they all got eaten.
Oh my God.
But on January 12th, they came across a Miwok camp. Now, a Miwok was another Native American tribe. They were much more peaceful than the Paiutes. And so they gave them what they had to eat. Acorns, grass, pine nuts. Wasn't much, but it was more than they'd had.
Sounds a lot better than human flesh.
Yeah.
And brains.
And then, so with this like little bit of base nourishment, William Eddy continues on, reaches civilization. A hurried rescue party was sent to rescue the other 6 survivors, and their trek had taken 33 days in total.
Wow.
So they were starving for a long time, and they ate their friends. But they didn't have much choice, so you can't really hold it against them.
Yummy.
And then James Reed, the man once exiled from the Donner Party, totally tries to redeem himself after the death of Snyder, and he agrees to join in a fight in the Spanish-American War. He makes a deal with the commander, and he basically says, "Okay, I'll come and fight for you if you send an expedition to go and find these people that I kind of fucked over at one point because I told them that we should take the Hastings cutoff." And the general agrees, and they send a small detachment uh, for the rescue effort. Um, After a few minor setbacks, it was this day, February 19th, now 1897, 47, not 97, sorry, that the first rescue party reached the camp at Truckee Lake. Though they weren't able to take everyone on this rescue attempt, they promised to return and left supplies enough to survive until the return. It would take 2 more trips to get everyone out and take care of all the bodies. Because all told, only 48 of the original 87 members of the Donner Party escaped their lives, and escaped unimaginable horror and hardship. We can all count ourselves lucky that we don't live in a time where this tragedy might even be a possibility.
Oh, yes. Oh my gosh.
And if that ain't a kick in the sack, I don't know what is.
And for all our listeners, be sure to go to our Facebook page, Two Nuts in the Sack, and give it a like. And same thing for our YouTube channel. Please like our videos and subscribe. We also have a Patreon account. It's Two Nuts in the Sack as well. So thank you for listening.
And our YouTube page is a little tricky because it's Two Nuts in the Sack, no spaces. Otherwise, you just get a bunch of really gross dudes talking about their nutsack.
Exactly.
So that's an important thing to remember. So, Two Nuts in the Sack, signing off.